The echo of a chair scraping against ancient polished floorboards is a sound that usually goes unnoticed in the sprawling 500-room labyrinth of Buckingham Palace. But on a Tuesday afternoon, that the royal household will never forget, that sound was a gunshot. It signaled the end of a performance that had lasted for decades. As the King and Queen left the thrones of Westminster Abbey during the coronation, the world saw a unified front, crowds bowing, tiaras glinting, and a legacy secured. But behind the velvet curtains of the private household corridors, the golden illusion was about to be incinerated. The palace had survived the abdication of a king, the death of a beloved matriarch, and the explosive departures of younger sons. But it was entirely unprepared for the moment. Queen Camilla turned on Princess Anne in full view of the staff. It was not a whispered disagreement. It was a visceral, psychological shattering of the royal order. When King Charles saw his sister standing motionless, her face a mask of iron, while Camilla's words cut through the room like a blade, the monarch was forced to choose. And in that moment, the man who had spent a lifetime waiting to protect his wife realized he had to protect the crown from her. To understand the weight of this fracture, one must look at the invisible architecture of the royal household's hierarchy. Inside the monarchy rank is not merely a title. It is a complex system of movement, timing, and silence. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, has long been the backbone of this structure, a woman who carries out hundreds of engagements a year with a blunt, no-nonsense discipline that reflects the late Queen Elizabeth II. She does not seek the spotlight. She embodies the duty. Camilla, conversely, has spent 30 years fighting a war of attrition for acceptance. Every public appearance for her is a calculation, every title a hard-won trophy. The tension between the king's sister and the king's consort had been simmering for years, but it reached a boiling point over a household instruction, a technical document deciding the sequence of roles for a major state reception. Anne, ever the guardian of protocol, questioned a last-minute change that bypassed senior staff. To Camilla, it wasn't a question of logistics. It was a question of her authority. She didn't hear a correction. She heard a verdict that she was still somehow an outsider. The confrontation erupted in the senior staff corridor, a space usually reserved for the quiet efficiency of aides and equerries. Anne had pointed out that the new arrangement broke the royal order, the accepted structure that prevents the monarchy from turning into a competition for visibility. Camilla's reaction was explosive. She accused Anne of undermining her position, of using protocol as a weapon to humiliate the Queen in front of the people sworn to serve her. The micro-detail that changed everything was the reaction of the staff. An aide looked down at his shoes. A secretary froze mid-step. The air in the palace grew thin. Charles, standing just a few feet away, didn't see a family argument. He saw the shattering of the institutional discipline he was crowned to uphold. He saw his sister's restraint, making his wife's anger look brittle and small. In a voice that silenced the hallway, Charles ordered the room cleared. The king was no longer a husband. He was the sovereign, and he was staring at a catastrophe that love could not fix. The illusion of Camilla's smooth transition to queen was predicated on the idea that she had earned the respect of the old guard, the faction of the palace that answers only to the crown's survival. Anne is the leader of that guard. When Camilla lashed out, she didn't just insult a sister-in-law. She attacked the very concept of duty that keeps the house standing. Charles retreated to his private study, a room filled with the scent of old leather and the weight of history, to read the written incident summary prepared by the household secretary. This document was the ultimate reality check. It didn't use emotive language. It simply recorded the facts. It noted Camilla's volume, Anne's silence, and the specific moment the king's authority had been compromised. Charles sat with the file in front of him, the paper feeling heavier than the crown itself. He realized that if he allowed his wife to command the household through resentment, he would lose the loyalty of the people who actually run the monarchy. The paradox of Charles's life has always been his devotion to Camilla versus his devotion to the institution. For 40 years, he had been her shield. But as king, his shield belongs to the state. The decision he made next was surgical. He removed Camilla's name from the planning notes for the next 3 major ceremonial engagements and handed control back to Anne. In the royal world, this is the equivalent of a public demotion. Controlling the ceremonial order means deciding who stands where, who speaks first, and who is seen as the center of the family. By choosing, Anne Charles was signaling to the staff and to the world that trust is earned through discipline, not granted by marriage. The Queen Consort received the revised briefing sheet in her sitting room, and the silence that followed was more devastating than any shout. The aide who delivered the message kept his eyes lowered, a detail that told Camilla the palace had already pivoted. The aftertaste of her outburst was the realization that in the cold calculus of the monarchy, her title was a loan, but Anne's authority was a birthright. The second confrontation took place behind closed doors, without the protective theater of aides or secretaries. Charles entered Camilla's room not to comfort her, but to explain the new reality. Camilla's defense was built on deep-seated wounds, the feeling of being judged, of being the other woman, even while wearing a tiara. She asked why Anne was protected so quickly, while she was left to carry the shame of a correction. Charles's answer was a philosophical punchline that would define his reign. The crown does not need protection from Anne. It needs protection from us. He told her that her anger had endangered the line, the continuity of the monarchy. If the staff saw the king's wife losing control, they would lose respect for the king's office. This was the shattering of their private bond in favor of their public duty. Camilla had spent her life wanting to be at Charles's side, but she realized that the side of a king is a lonely, cold place where love is often sacrificed for the sake of order. The public soon noticed the shift. During the next royal engagement, Anne was the one moving with the confidence of an equerry, her presence steady and commanding. Camilla was present, but she was a shadow, her movements restricted by the very protocol she had tried to defy. The newspapers ran headlines about duty under fire, and the public mood began to coalesce around the Princess Royal. Anne didn't have to say a word. Her performance of duty was the ultimate rebuttal to the drama. The nostalgia for the late Queen Elizabeth II was channeled through Anne, making Camilla's outburst look like a betrayal of the old values. The palace had become a cinematic document of a family choosing survival over sentiment. Charles had successfully tilled the garden of his household, but the cost was a domestic silence that would take months to thaw. Fallout inside a palace rarely arrives as shouting. Sometimes it arrives as a missing name, a changed seating order, a secretary who no longer knocks, or a corridor that falls quiet when someone appears. For Camilla, the punishment was not announced with grandeur. It arrived in a single revised briefing sheet. When she saw Anne's name where hers had been, the room seemed to shrink. Camilla received the update in her sitting room from an aide who kept his eyes lowered. The revised household order confirmed that Anne would supervise the final structure of the ceremonial engagement. That detail mattered, because ceremonial control is not only about where people stand. It signals trust. It tells staff who hold steady authority when the family is shaken. Camilla read the page once, then again, as if the words might change if she waited long enough. A household order is an internal palace instruction telling aides who is responsible for decisions and movements. This one was devastating because it did not scold her, did not accuse her, and did not even mention the confrontation. It simply removed her from the center. The Queen Consort felt humiliation first, then disbelief. The palace machinery had moved against her quietly, and quiet punishment can feel colder than rage. Charles felt the cost before he even reached her door. He passed the corridor outside her room and paused, knowing exactly what his decision had done. The king had chosen discipline over domestic peace, and that choice mattered because he was not only a husband trying to calm his wife. He was the monarch, the person expected to protect the crown from disorder, even when disorder came from inside his own marriage. Still, the pain of it sat heavily on him. Camilla folded the briefing sheet once then again. Her fingers tightened on the paper as she asked the aide whether Anne had requested the change. The aide hesitated just long enough to make the answer hurt before he said the instruction had come from the king himself. That was the final blow. Anne's involvement had wounded her pride, but Charles's order wounded her heart. Inside the palace, the Sussex matter was no longer being treated as active support. It was being treated as closed history with limited access. Silence inside the palace often speaks louder than statements. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, received her own warning quietly. She was told the children would be shielded from the details, yet she immediately thought of George. The princess understood that one day he might learn his name had been read aloud while Harry's support was redirected. She wanted the children protected, but not hardened. She wanted them safe, but not raised on victory built from family loss. The palace could manage documents and language, but it could not manage what passed between father and son behind a closed door. When William entered the room, Charles was no longer standing behind a desk. He was seated near the window, hands folded, looking older than the title he carried. There were no advisors, no Camilla, no papers between them. Only a father and a son facing the cost of a decision that protected 3 children while confirming the fracture of another. Charles had requested the meeting himself. The king did not want a constitutional briefing. Not this time. This meeting was not about polished language or careful procedure. It was about a father explaining why he had made a painful choice. He looked at William and knew the prince deserved the truth before the world twisted it into something simpler and colder. William did not sit like a man who had won. The future king carried the decision heavily because George, Charlotte, and Louis were now protected in a way that would be impossible to ignore. Their names had become part of the estate instruction representing the direct line of the monarchy. Charles believed that line had to be secured before family conflict reached it. Still, the prince knew security had arrived with a shadow. Charles told William he had not redirected the trust to reward him. He had done it to protect the children from future instability, from arguments that could one day reach their schooling, their security, and their public lives. The king admitted the April settlement dinner had changed him. That dinner convinced him that estate support could become a weapon inside the family if it remained tied to unresolved anger. William listened without interrupting. The prince finally said he never wanted his children's safety to come at Harry's expense. He knew the Duke would feel replaced, and that thought troubled him. The future king promised Charles that the children would never be taught to celebrate what Harry had lost. They would be taught duty, not triumph, protection, not pride, continuity, not cruelty. Charles lowered his eyes when William said that. The king heard mercy in his son's answer, and for a moment the decision felt less like a wound and more like a burden being shared. By morning, the secret was no longer secret. Britain woke to a front page that felt less like news and more like a verdict. The Sussex Trust had been sent to the Wales children. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered in the rain. Some defended Charles, others accused him of cutting Harry out with surgical precision. The monarchy had gone public without saying a word. William saw the front page before the palace statement was ready. He understood instantly that the story had escaped the quiet language of estate planning and entered the louder world of public judgment. The trust redirection now looked bigger than family money. It looked like a public sign that the future belonged firmly to his children. Charles heard the broadcast summary in silence. The words "future safeguarding" were repeated again and again. The monarch knew that phrase would protect the decision, but it would not protect Harry from humiliation. Catherine watched the coverage quietly until Charlotte entered the room. The princess turned it off before her daughter could hear the words, because motherhood came before monarchy. In that moment, she knew Charlotte's name was now part of the public storm, and she hated that innocence had been pulled into adult conflict. She wanted the children protected from danger, but also from bitterness, from learning too early that royal safety can come with someone else's pain. William's photograph became the image of the day, showing him entering Windsor with a fixed expression. He looked controlled, but not untouched, strong, but not victorious. Charles did not answer the shouting. Harry did not receive comfort from the headlines. William did not celebrate the support. Catherine did not allow the children to become trophies. The papers could rage, but the final meaning of the decision belonged to the family left standing inside the palace walls. In the end, the trust fund was never only about money. It was about belief. Charles believed the crown had to survive the wounds of his own family. William believed his children had to be protected without being taught bitterness. Harry believed he had been pushed beyond the gate. The monarchy, cold as it sometimes seemed, made its final choice. The future would be guarded before the past could break it. Charles carried the sorrow of that choice long after the papers were signed. The redirection had become a defining moment because it turned private pain into a formal estate decision. It told the world which branch would be protected first. It told Harry that love had not been enough to restore trust. It told William that duty had arrived with a wound attached. William accepted the burden with resolve. George, Charlotte, and Louis had emerged as the protected center, representing the steady passing of duty from one generation to the next. Harry felt the loss in a way no statement could soften. The Duke was not erased, but his branch was no longer treated as central to the crown's future planning. For Harry, that truth cut deeper than the money. It meant the family had stopped planning around his return and started planning around his absence. Charles knew the final emotional truth. The April settlement dinner had ended the old hope, and the secret estate meeting had sealed the new reality. The king had once believed he could keep the bridge standing between both sons. But the bridge had cracked under anger, fear, and mistrust. William inherited the duty to keep the next generation safe. Harry inherited the pain of being moved away from the center. No one walked away untouched. The monarchy chose continuity over reconciliation. It chose children over conflict. It chose duty over sentiment. That was the verdict, cold but clear. Charles made the choice. William accepted the burden. Harry felt the loss. The legend of Richard Burton and his 5 women mirrors this royal drama in its intensity and its tragedy. Burton, like Charles, was a man caught between the women who defined him. From Sybil Williams, who believed in him before the world did, to Elizabeth Taylor, the storm that consumed him, Burton's life was a series of emotional collisions. He conquered the world of stage and screen, yet remained a permanent refugee from his own heart. The public saw a titan, but those who knew him saw a man trying to fill a hole that was exactly the shape of one woman. He traded the quiet safety of a Welsh home for a fire that eventually turned his world to ash. He died in a small Swiss village, wanting nothing more than to hear a Welsh accent again. He proved that you can spend 40 years and $40 million trying to move on, only to find yourself back where you started. The internal conflict of the royal family is the same conflict that defined Burton. It is the struggle between the person and the role, between the heart and the crown. Burton felt he had betrayed his talent for money and his peace for passion. Charles feels he has sacrificed his son for the stability of the institution. Both men were surrounded by extraordinary women who left unmistakable marks. Sybil gave Burton unwavering belief. Elizabeth gave him power. Sally Hay offered him peace. In the royal household, Anne represents the belief, Camilla represents the power, and Catherine represents the hope for peace. But the man in the center remains a stranger to himself, a collection of roles and responsibilities. When the applause fades and the cameras disappear, the names that remain are the ones that shaped the journey. Richard Burton's greatest performance may have belonged on stage, but his greatest love existed far beyond any script. For him, Elizabeth Taylor was the story against which every other relationship was measured. They recognized in each other a brilliance and a vulnerability that few understood. Their love survived marriages and divorces because it was built on recognition. Similarly, the bond between William and Harry was once built on a shared trauma that only they understood. But while Burton and Taylor's story refused to end with a breakup, the story of the royal brothers has reached a devastating act of severance. The machinery of the palace has successfully executed the assassination of their brotherhood, leaving an entire nation in silence. The truth has been standardized, the fluff has been removed, and the cinematic theater continues. As we look at the images of the royal family today, we must look for the micro details. The way Anne stands ahead of protocol, the way Charles's hand rests on the file, the way Camilla's smile doesn't quite reach her eyes. These are the facts of the new era. The palace has been standardized, and the commercial cinematic reality of a 21st century monarchy has been established. It is a world of high information density, where every seating plan is a statement of war, and every apology is a treaty. Charles has secured the line, but he has also confirmed the fracture. The monarchy survives by being a system that is more durable than the humans it consumes. The crown stays upright because the people wearing it are willing to break themselves to keep it there. Thank you for staying with us through this deep dive into the psychological ruins of a Hollywood titan and the high-stakes world of royal duty. If you feel the weight of these stories, if you recognize the magnetic pull of an era where stars and sovereigns were larger than life and twice as broken, join our community. Subscribe to our channel as we continue to peel back the velvet curtains on the lives that defined a century. What do you think of the king's final verdict? Was it a necessary act of protection or a heartbreaking rejection? Does the crown's survival justify the loss of a family's bond? Share your thoughts in the comments. The stories of the stars and the sovereigns never truly end. They just wait for the next chapter to be written. The lights of London shine on the palaces, but the shadows within them have grown longer. The truth has found its way to the light, and the silence is finally broken. Goodbye for now, but the conversation has just begun. Keep looking for the truth behind the glamour, for that is where the real story lives. The cinematic journey of the monarchy continues solitary, silent, and supreme.